Our final speaker of the evening is Professor Mike Stubbs. Mike is Director of FACT and a jointly appointed professor by Liverpool John Moores University as a Professor of Art, Media and Curating. He was previously Head of Programme for the Australian Centre of Moving Image Melbourne and a Senior Research Fellow at Dundee University. Stubbs has commissioned and curated and produced over 350 exhibition programmes, including Stanley Kubrik for the ACMI and Krzysztof Wodiczko for Liverpool Biennial. He is the founder of Root and Abandoned Normal Devices Festivals and is also an award-winning moving image artist in his own right, having shown work at the Baltic and Tate. His work has won more than a dozen major international awards, and in 2002 he was awarded a Fleck Fellowship from Banff. Mike's talk this evening is titled Imagination and Uncertainty. His talk explores an approach to art science collaboration, curation and public engagement which has developed at FACT, the Foundation for Art and Creative Technology in Liverpool. Here, a rich practice has emerged which raises issues concerning the place of science and wider culture, public understanding of the role and nature of science, and how fruitful collaborations between art and science can be created based on criticality, imagination and interaction.
So I'm going to speak partially as an artist. Thanks. But of course I'm also speaking within my role at FACT. And there are a number of people in the room that we've collaborated with, and we've heard some great things already, so I'm not going to repeat any of that. I would love to have followed Lee's presentation because I'm going to begin by talking about me dad, Joseph Morris Stubbs. Yeah, so that resonated with me a little because he was an engineer and a technician who worked on the first electron microscope in Britain and then the first scanning microscope in Britain. As a technician, never had any qualifications, and he did have a bit of a patent on the freeze-drying process. I will move about too much for your frame, is that it? So, having a very clever-minded father who got dead excited when Crick and Watson discovered the DNA, and basically had this thing, if you can't prove it, it doesn't exist, was a wonderful spur to me to be an artist, which is of course what I did. And I suppose what I just want to try and unpick a little or stimulate some thought around is the notion of belief. So at the moment today we had a curatorial meeting with a eminent curator from Spain who's working on a big exhibition we're doing with CERN in Geneva for FACT in November. And of course there is, in a sense, there's this sort of enormous hierarchy of knowledge at CERN, and they're actually very protective about their scientific principles, even though they're partners on this artist residency program that FACT partners. So of course this is true. The world is flat, we all know it. Now this is my guessing game. So it's hands up time. Who's the first person who can name the person on the left? Thank you. Next. Yoko Ono. Next.
The Russian creator, Victor
Good try, but no. That is Nam June Paik, who is probably the best known, most important media artist going back 50 years. And this is Abe Shabir on the right, no one ever gets that one, who was basically the technician that invented the video synthesizer and ran Sony Lab in Japan. And for me, they bring together a whole load of stuff around art, science, technology in Liverpool, where I moved 10 years ago, thereabouts.
Unfold is about star formation and the cycle of star formation. How we are going to go from interstellar matter, which is basically a huge reservoir of gas, to the formation of stars like our sun.
今回はオブザベーションデータ、観測データとシミュレーションデータと2つのデータを使ったんですけれども、科学者たちがいわゆる科学者たちが使うようなビジュアリゼーションとは別の 本からトランスレーター使って床が触れるのでより触覚もこう体感できるようなそういう作り。
What is very interesting is the way he managed to give some kind of life to the pixels. We have the image pixel, the data pixel. Now, using supercomputer, we are able to have digital vision of the universe, and we are able to compute the universe.
Okay. So that is Curating and Vincent Meunier collaborating. I think Andy had a bit to do with the public programme, thank you. That's on tour, it's currently in Shanghai, and it's very successful and people love it because it's embodied and it creates an effect. I actually quite like the other work by Kurokawa more when it's more abstract, because in a sense this is, like, it's interesting for me to think about material in relationship to your garden, because this is largely, still kind of data viz, and it's still a representation. And for me, that is a fundamental question of a lot of art science or science art collaborations and projects. And this is also about the hierarchy of knowledge and money, in terms of whether money is for research, because it's like 9 times more for science than it is for art in the UK. So we have to respect what artists do and why they do their own practice as research in itself. So this is Ahmed Bassioni, is Egypt's deceased, best known new media artist, who was shot dead in Tahrir Square protesting. But he did a project many times where he basically was just measuring his own performative bodily exploration in different sites around the city of Cairo. Now that's, for me, that isn't, like, it's not real science, it's kind of, well, it's not real science according to scientists, but for him it was his practice. This one, again, no such thing as gravity, curated with Rob Lefrene, who also had a bit to do with. So Nick's project was a water-driven car, and he managed to drive it around Liverpool and to prove that you could actually drive a car on water. Who is a scientist in the room? Okay. Is it possible to drive a car on water? Yeah, hydrogen, end product. But in a sense, it was a provocation to speculate around how truth and belief are formed, which in a sense was the whole subject for this exhibition. That's a plug for a thing we're doing later in the year in Toxteth Reservoir. This is a plug for something we're doing. Actually, that man at the back did the graphics for me. Thank you, Slim. So this is an exhibition in York and in Panama at the end of the year. And it takes the starting point of William Smith, who invented geology, or is attributed to inventing the whole notion of strata. And why I wanted to talk a bit about William Smith is because he was an engineer. And really what he did, he used his powers of observation when he was cutting trenches and then canals and railway cuttings. And actually just started to note that actually some of those lines in the rock look a little bit like the lines in the rock over there. So he then started drawing them and noting them, because it was helping him work out where to cut the rock, you know, and avoid the really hard, tough bit. And then he realised that across the UK you could make a connection between the strata here and the strata there. He then went on to draw the first geological map of Britain. And he is strongly associated with York and the York Philosophical Society and York Museum, which then led to the York Museum and Art Gallery. So we're making a big show there with some brilliant artists, including the Kurokawa piece, or a new version of it, thinking about exploration and thinking about geology as the first natural science. And I suppose I wanted to mention it because it's just that thing about observation. So, qualification. Now, that was quite a good thing. Not very useful. I don't know, maybe it was useful. Some people would purport, of course, that it ended the Second World War, and it brought it to a close. Yeah. But the guy that did that, Oppenheimer, was of course the inventor of CERN itself. And at the end of the war, when he realised what he'd invented and thought, hang on a minute, could we do something which is for non-military purposes using particle physics and nuclear research, and came up with this non-nationalistic research institution, CERN, home of the Hadron Collider and the Atlas Project and all that, which have now, of course, is the site where we do these artist residencies, which we've been doing for 3 years and bringing together into an exhibition. So some of these are the artists that were lucky enough to win the prize, and very competitive international open call. This will be on in Liverpool in November. There will be an opening on November the 22nd, which is also the date of my father's deceased birthday. And also just to mention that, of course, there will be a public programme and there will be a laser talk, I believe, to coincide with this one. We'll probably get Mark Wright to speak at that one, who was meant to be doing this one, but he's buggered off to Indonesia. So anyway, so nice thing coming. So this is a picture of young Chol Kim. That'll do. So, what are we watching there? Does it matter? Is it beautiful? Is it just an aesthetic effect? Or is it an experiment? So that's an earlier experiment that Young Chul did, and on the basis that he wanted to use some chambers where he could create microgravities and then do further experiments at CERN, he won the prize, and some of that work will be shown back in Liverpool. But I like that little clip of video there because it's just ambiguous. And it's kind of wondrous, but you know, a couple of people have talked about wonder, but perhaps it's magic. And that's some of the, you know, you can't really use the magic word at CERN. So Harun Mirza basically describes some of his practice as being a magic realist. And perhaps within, you know, those who are art historians or art critics and curators would recognise that magic realism is like probably the most dominant part of contemporary practice. And I think that somehow this is often just that's like being offered there. We need to inspire people to be curious and creative, whatever it takes. But of course, that sometimes is disorganised. So if you take art out of the education agenda, which has happened in this country, what are people going to do instead? To experiment and imagine new worlds? They're either going to be forced into coding and learning coding, yeah, or they'll take drugs, yeah. So I think that we actually need to be a bit active in contesting art being deprioritised within the secondary education system. And of course we do lots of things to provide informal learning situations at FAT with lots of different people and lots of different scenarios. Has anyone seen this film? How many? Is it a majority? It's a minority. Okay.
Hi, my name is Bailey. Just to know, I like when you this is my new 3D hand, and I can hold a tennis racket with it, and it's made with a 3D printer, and it's mainly for giving me an extra boost of confidence.
So that's Bailey. More of that. So that was made in a lab within an exhibition where people could basically use an open source model to make prosthetic devices using simple 3D printing on a weekly basis, but that's also to destigmatize prosthetics with some great partners. Okay, so that's Be Another Lab. It's a collective based in Spain who've been doing a residency for 2 years at FACT, have been up to LJMU, and you can probably work it out. Basically, you've got a PO view with a VR headset, so you're seeing the view in real time of the other person that you're working with, and it's the most extraordinary. If you get a chance to do it, do it. Like, it's the most extraordinary experience in terms of empathy. So it's basically an empathy lab. Now, I don't know whether that's a scientific project or it's an artistic project, and I don't care. It's dead interesting. And I don't you know, their makeup is science, technology, and art. Like, they've all got different practices. When they come together to do something, it's an experiment. So, really, people will continue to stick their fingers in cracks for fun, boredom. You know, why do most things happen? You know, why does Andy do what he does or Lee does what you do? Is it because you're driven by a purpose and you've got this great moral justice to fix something? Which I don't think artists have got at all. I don't think artists work to a purpose. I think designers do, because it's a commercial environment. However, people will continue to find ways to entertain their minds, respond to the world, and effectively pick something up like that and say, have you had a look at this? It's got an inside and an outside, and God, look at the way the light shines through it. And I don't think that is at all dissimilar if you want to make a divide between disciplines of art or science. Marshmallow Laser Feast, brilliant project in the forest in Grisdale. It's me. And hopefully we can have a chat and a conversation because it's a hot evening. Thank you.